Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. Prime Minister Modi's meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Brazil seems to have laid the foundation for a new relationship between the two countries. It lasted for 80 minutes, and PTI reports the two leaders have established a personal rapport. The Chinese president has invited Mr. Modi to attend the APEC summit in Beijing in November and to play a bigger role in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So are Achhe Din about to begin for Delhi and Beijing? My guests are former Foreign Secretary Lalit Mansingh, one of India's top foreign policy analysts C. Raja Mohan, and the diplomatic editor of The Hindu, Suhasini Haidar. Mr. Mansingh, let's start with Prime Minister's meeting with President Xi. It was scheduled for 40 minutes, it ended up lasting for 80, and PTI, quoting the official Indian spokesperson, says that the two leaders struck a personal rapport which augurs well for the future. As a former Foreign Secretary, would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I think so. But part of the reason is that Mr. Modi knows China well, is familiar with the Chinese leaders, so the chemistry has been working for some time. But all in all, I think it was an impressive debut for Mr. Modi on the international scene. And meeting with the Chinese Prime Minister was probably the best part.
In fact, when a 40-minute meeting goes on comfortably for 80, double the length, does that suggest that the two men actually are going beyond just formalities and getting to know and like each other?
Well, you know, one has learned that Mr. Modi has a very business-like attitude. He doesn't waste too much time in small talk. So obviously they had that many issues to discuss. And when you think of India and China, there is a long agenda of issues on the bilateral side.
Now, Professor Rajamohan, one of the interesting things is that President Xi Jinping has invited India to attend the APEC summit in China in November, and he also asked India to play a closer and deeper role in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. How significant are those two invitations from the Chinese president?
No, both are nice thoughts, but the problem is India is not a member of the APEC, nor is it only an observer in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So I think, but it's a nice play. You know, I think this is the first time India is being invited to the APEC summit. We've been asking our friends to support India's membership, but that's not really moved. So I think it's a nice diplomatic move.
Could this be a precursor to a formal invitation to join APEC and to upgrade our position in the SCO?
No, that's not in China's hands alone. I mean, the others have to come in as well. So meanwhile, I believe that we have two other summits to go to, the G20 as well as the SAARC. So the dates will still have to be worked out, assuming...
But those are technicalities. Yeah. I'm simply asking, is this invitation from the Chinese a sign that they are perhaps trying to find a way of giving us a greater role in these organizations?
No, I think they're just scoring a point over the United States.
Well, you know, India's real ambition is to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And joining APEC is sort of halfway to there. We have been denied membership of APEC on the grounds that they had not opened up the membership for countries like India. If there's a possibility of joining India now, I think there's a greater possibility of our joining the TPP, which is our real goal.
And is President Xi creating an opening for that?
Well, it's interesting. We can't get in without the Americans agreeing to us. But if China is sponsoring our case and Mr. Modi is going to Washington, it will put pressure on Obama to respond to this.
And this could be something the Chinese president did deliberately, consciously.
I'm pretty sure.
Suhasini Haidar, your paper, The Hindu, highlights on its front page that President Xi called for a negotiated solution to the border issues at an early date. And one of your rivals, the Times of India, interprets this as China's willingness to be more receptive to India's point of view on the issue. Would you agree with that?
Well, I will certainly agree with the idea that the Chinese leadership is showing that they not just want to take this relationship forward, they actually want to finish some of those negotiations that have been carrying on for more than a decade. But Karan, the larger message over here, I think, shows where the Modi government is headed. In the last 1.5 months, the government hasn't even really been in the saddle for 2 months yet. If you were to take a look at where the government has spent its maximum amount of time in terms of other countries, you would find that China comes way above every other country. After all, there have already been 4 meetings at the highest level. There was the foreign minister coming to Delhi from China, Mr. Wang Yi. There was the Vice President Hamid Ansari visit to Beijing. There's been the army chiefs of both countries meeting in China as well. And now this meeting at the highest level, and then 2 more proposed, given that President Xi will come to India in September, and Prime Minister Modi conceivably could go for the APEC summit. So what you're seeing is a huge emphasis on China. Many had wondered, which country Mr. Modi was really going to spend a lot of focus on. Would it be Japan? Would it be the US? But instead, we're seeing China really forging ahead. And I think that in itself will bring about the platform, if you like, for some kind of resolution.
Professor Rajamohan, I want to add to the point that Suhasini made, something that was in her article on the front page of the Hindu today, and that's the sort of language that the Chinese president is quoted to have used. To begin with, he said that he was interested in enhancing the China-India strategic and cooperative partnership to a higher level, and to jointly safeguard our strategic opportunities. Then he went on to say that he saw both countries as long-lasting strategic and cooperative partners rather than rivals. And finally, he says, and I'm going to quote this for the audience, if the two countries speak in one voice, the whole world will attentively listen. If the two countries join hand in hand, the whole world will closely watch. Not only is the rhetoric extremely warm from the Chinese, but this concept of strategic partnership seems to be new.
Karan, I don't want to curb your enthusiasm, but I think we are overreading into this. When we talk about what did she say on the border dispute? Look, we should solve the boundary problem. I mean, that they've always said. The difference is this. I think what Modi has told him in return was, look, I want the border to settle now. Now, the problem is the last 3-4 years, the question of solving the boundary has gone back to the back burner. Now, India wants an early solution. The Chinese are not ready for it. So I think it's not clear that problem has been solved at all.
No, I'm not saying the problem has been solved at all. I'm asking a different question. I'm saying, limit yourself then to just the border rather than the bigger strategic partnership. We'll come back to that in a moment. Even just on the border, the interesting thing is that the Chinese president is talking about an early solution. If it was the Chinese position previously that they weren't interested in an early solution, is he not coming around to the Indian viewpoint?
No, I think since he has come to power, there have been a couple of rounds of the dialogue on the boundary. And both cases, they're not ready. They want us to make big concessions. If you're willing to give Tabang, you'll get a deal tomorrow.
So then the front page story in the Hindu, which the Times in a very real sense echoes as well, you're saying is showing more enthusiasm and reading more into the language that they too use rather than into the reality?
Well, I agree with Raja. We shouldn't be too excited about the language. The Chinese are very adept at using doublespeak. They can give you the best of rhetoric, and yet in action you'll find that they're not making any progress. The border issue is a case in point. We've been negotiating it for over 5 decades. 15 rounds of foreign secretary level negotiations, 17 rounds at the level of a special.
You don't think a change could begin now with the new leadership in India and China? That's the point I'm asking.
I will grant you this. The difference now is that the Chinese respect Mr. Modi as a man who has got a large mandate and is known for his no-nonsense approach and his strong views on security. And if that's the beginning and the Chinese are willing to negotiate, maybe.
Suhasini, it was your paper that actually front paged that story, and that particular quotation about the Chinese president wanting a negotiated solution at an early date. You've heard a fair amount of skepticism from Professor Rajamohan, not so much from Mr. Man Singh. How important is that phrase, at an early date, from the Chinese, particularly if Professor Mohan says that up to now the Chinese weren't interested in an early solution?
Well, absolutely. And Karan, when it comes to language, decoding Chinese statements is something I will defer to Professor Rajamohan as well as Ambassador Man Singh. I will say this, though, that in the past, we have certainly seen Mr. Modi himself do things that perhaps are not expected even from his own party's standpoint. I'd like to refer you back to about 3 years ago, 5 years ago, but 2009, when there were skirmishes or reported incursions at the LAC. At the same time, there was an incident of China rejecting or putting stapled visas for Indian citizens. And finally, there were those Gujarati businessmen who were in jail in China. The rhetoric in India was very loud. Even the government was taking a very stern look at it, calling in the Chinese diplomats at the ministerial level. And Mr. Modi actually took a delegation to China at that time. And amongst other things, not only was talking about the release of the Gujarati businessman, we also understand he was speaking with Huawei, the company, about an R&D facility perhaps in Gujarat. So while I completely agree that one cannot get excited, and India-China relations are really as old as the mountains, and these settlements will take a very long time, I think we have to recognize there is something different. Whether it's in the frequency of the meetings we are seeing, whether it is in the focus that is being put, because after all, Japan is not getting that same focus. Japan's visit has been put off. The US meetings certainly haven't got this kind of focus, but China is getting that focus right now from this government.
Do you believe that Mr. Modi, and you've just heard Suhasini give you a couple of examples, who has the capacity not to go with the mainstream response when there are incursions, not to go with the mainstream response when Gujarati businessmen are in jail in China, might be a man who picks up a relationship with Xi Jinping, who picks up on Xi Jinping's willingness to negotiate at an early date and actually produces a result? Sometimes chemistry can matter.
I believe that, and I think Mr. Modi is giving the Chinese a dose of their own diplomacy. On the one hand, he's saying, come and take part in India's economic growth, invest in India, India is open for business. On the other hand, as a man who believes in security and the territorial integrity of India, I think he's giving an equally tough message, saying we need to solve our border problem and security can't be compromised with.
I want to come back to that point that in a sense you didn't fully answer, because you went off and talked specifically about the border. There's so much rhetoric from the Chinese president about strategic partnership. I don't believe India ever thinks of China as a strategic partner. I'm a little surprised that the Chinese think of us as a strategic partner.
No.
Is that not
Karan,
to you
I think the term they've used, the strategic and cooperative partnership, that is the code. That is the accepted phrase, the Foreign Office talks in code with China. That's been as old as, 6-7 years. So they're not saying anything new. I think what is new is Modi as a strong leader, can he find a different way of engaging China? And China is having problems with Japan and with the US on the other side. Does that open space? I think that is a genuine possibility. I think what Modi is saying is something different from the previous government, which is, look, I'm open for business on the economic side, but on the security side, I'm going to be tough. I wanted to address the boundary problem. We're going to sort out the delays in the projects on the border. We're going to modernize our infrastructure. I'm going to increase the number of troops. Even last 2 days, we've been talking about incursions. So I think it's a different mix. I think this mix probably has a better chance than the previous policy of saying nice things, but not meaning them.
And do you think that the Chinese, when they see a different mix, respond to it in the sense that there's a toughness behind Modi which was missing earlier? And do they respect that hint of toughness?
They always respect power. Chinese, the only thing they understand is power. And I think someone who's upfront, be frank, look, I'm ready to do things which benefit both of us, but I'm going to stand firm on my concerns. And that is the basis to proceed forward. I think this is a good formula. And I think we've not tried this before.
Suhasini, you undoubtedly are in touch with the Indian delegation in Fortaleza. What is the response of Prime Minister Modi and the team around him to the language he's heard from the Chinese, the invitations he's received from the Chinese, and the sort of, not concessions, but the sense of accommodation, whether it's on trade, whether it's on the border or anything else? How is the Indian delegation responding to this?
Well, certainly the Indian delegation sounding upbeat after it, and you saw that Prime Minister Modi himself tweeted about his meeting straight after that meeting. So there's no doubt that that things did go well in terms of the meeting. The fact that we were told at least twice during their briefings before that the meeting was expected or was scheduled for about 40 minutes. Instead, it lasted about 80 minutes. But I do want to point out that in fact many of the expectations from the meeting, when it came to concrete announcements, announcements on industrial parks and other issues. Actually, they did pull back from a lot of those concrete announcements. Perhaps they're holding them, they're saving them for another date, and the BRICS forum was not the place to announce them. But certainly they did sound upbeat. Also, Prime Minister Modi during the BRICS deliberations, referring to China as well. I think what we've seen is that the two leaders in any case had enough preparatory work over the last month or so leading up to this meeting to feel reasonably confident that they can make a difference if they do meet again this year and have a proper bilateral meeting. But I completely do see the point that this is a fractured relationship that has had trouble over the years. There are problems, and we keep coming up with the border as the only problem. But of course, there's that massive problem of the bilateral trade deficit as well, as much as $40 billion. The visa situation has not effectively changed. Perhaps China has stopped issuing stapled visas for citizens of India from Jammu and Kashmir, but the Arunachal Pradesh problem quite clearly has not gone away. So there are many places where that trust deficit between both countries crops up very quickly.
Absolutely, and yet there still is a sense in which the two new leaders might be just able to open a new chapter. Maybe that's putting it too strongly, might be able to start a new phase. The interesting thing is that the meeting with the Chinese president went on for 80 minutes. The meeting with Putin was first postponed because Putin got delayed in Brasilia, and then it only lasted for 40 minutes. And we don't have that much knowledge about how the two of them got on or what they discussed. It clearly seems that Putin was business as usual in the old mold. There was something new and different about the opening with China that may have happened. Would you agree with that?
Well, we have a more active bilateral relationship with China than with Russia.
Yet Russia is our oldest ally, as Mr. Modi himself said.
I know, but post the end of the Cold War, the relationship with Russia has been declining. The last time we had a good meeting with Mr. Putin was 2000, when he came here on a bilateral visit, when Mr. Vajpayee.
So you're saying that the relationship with Russia is not cooling, but is falling into perspective, whereas the one with China could be about to change?
I would say the relations with Russia is a bit stagnant in terms of trade, in terms of investments. It's not expanding. So it's not the same kind of relationship. But what we have with China are a series of very important issues which are vital for our growth and for our security.
And there's room with the relationship with China to blossom if the problems can be tackled.
It will. And let us not forget, this was not a bilateral summit. This was a meeting of the sidelines.
That we know.
I think, with Russia, there are fewer problems. I mean, there are problems, the economic relationship is not expanding, but there are no political problems between India and Russia. So while the China thing, look, we have big issues, we have big potential, but also big problems. So I wouldn't, I don't think we should put too much into the, a lot of the things are scheduling issues. So we should measure the two relationships on that basis.
Sajni, how much of a problem has been created as a result of the frequency of the meetings with China, as a result of the future meetings that are planned, as far as Mr. Modi's relationship with Japan and his personal friendship with Shinzo Abe is concerned? Because not only has his visit to Japan slipped to September, but what's even worse is the emphasis, as you pointed out at the moment, is entirely on the Beijing-Delhi track. Delhi-Tokyo seems to have been forgotten.
Well, certainly the message does not seem to have been lost in Tokyo. Karan, this is something the Hindu has been reporting about, and certainly just the manner in which the trip of Prime Minister Modi expected for Japan, July 3rd to the 5th, the dates had more or less been set, even though they had not been announced. That date being put off, the fact that the Japanese Foreign Ministry certainly heard the news to begin with from Indian agencies, from the PTI, and not a direct communique, certainly caused its own problems. We've seen other problems as well. For example, the India-US-Japan trilateral that was expected on June the 23rd was abruptly cancelled when the Japanese delegation said they had prior commitments. And then we see this visit of Prime Minister Modi. Remember, he had said that Japan was actually going to be the first country he would visit. After that, he decided to go to Bhutan first, and that was certainly understood because it was his commitment to the subcontinent and the neighborhood. But then it seems to have got progressively shifted. Now we have this big international splash, this multilateral splash there in Fortaleza. Prime Minister Modi not just meeting the BRICS leaders, but remember he's going to meet the South American heads of state as well. He'll have met more than a dozen heads of state
are
before
the Japanese feeling a little miffed?
With Prime Minister Shinzo
Is Mr. Abe feeling a little miffed?
Absolutely, and that's certainly something we have picked up in the fact also that the programs of the two prime ministers are not being matched with quite the alacrity we saw when Prime Minister Modi had planned to go there in July. Now, the two prime ministers will probably only meet at the beginning of September.
There's something you said right at the very beginning of this discussion. I want to pick up on it. You said that in one possible explanation for the Xi Jinping invitation to the APEC summit in November and also to play a bigger, deeper role in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was actually to preclude America from trying to open that same door. Is there a wider sense in which the enthusiasm that the Chinese seem to be showing towards Mr. Modi is actually designed to prevent him getting too close to America where he's going in September?
Absolutely. Look, the Chinese, as I said, they're having serious problems with the US and Japan. So they want to manage the Eastern Front and would like to keep the Southern Front with India relatively calm. And if India is satisfied with words and doesn't do things with the US, they win the game without doing very much. But I think...
In other words, the challenge for Mr. Modi is to say, I insist on going beyond words, I'm not going to be sweet-talked.
Exactly. And I think he's also going to play hardball. I think the Japan visit will be a success. And I think he's not going to abandon the other relationships because of the potential in the China relationship.
Although at the moment, would you accept that the Japan relationship has been allowed to look as if it's sliding and that could have been handled better?
Could have been handled better, but my sense is, look, structurally the interests of India and Japan, there's so much convergence today and there's so much we can do together. I don't think he's going to miss that opportunity.
The interesting thing, Mr. Mansingh, and I'm putting this to you as a former foreign secretary, is that India at the moment is being courted assiduously by Washington and Beijing, by Japan, by European Union countries like Germany, France and Britain. Everyone seems to want to be a suitor of India. That must make Mr. Modi a most wanted man.
Well, I think it's deserved because Mr. Modi has outlined a foreign policy that seems to be attractive to all the big powers of the world.
But isn't there a danger when you're the girl that every man wants to hold the hand of, that if you've got so many suitors behind you, you might rub and brush one off at the wrong time in the wrong way? And is there a sense in which that might be happening perhaps accidentally to Japan?
I don't think polygamy is ruled out in international diplomacy. I think India can have perfectly good relations with all the powers. And on Japan, let me say, I don't think Japan has been sidelined. There may be some miscommunication, but we have a lot of things going with Japan. Japan is the only country that has actually put in money in our infrastructure when everybody else has been complaining about it. So Mr. Modi is not going to let Japan out of his sight. I think it's going to be a very strong and probably the defining relationship of this government.
Sashni, I want to ask you for an answer literally in one sentence because we're out of time. How do you respond to the question with which I opened the show? Could Achhe Din between Delhi and Beijing be on the horizon? Is it a premature thought?
Well, all I can say is that there will be much more engagement. Whether Achhe Din come after that or not, I think, Karan, you're giving too little credit to the previous government and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh for having really brought that feeling of Achhe Din over the past decade between India and China. They were able to really put aside so many of their differences and go ahead. But whether they'll be able to make that big breakthrough, as Professor Rajamohan says, that's going to be crucial.
All right, whether that big breakthrough will happen is going to be crucial, but the opportunity for a possible breakthrough is getting closer and closer. That, I hope, is a consensus that we can all agree on. My thanks to Sashni Haidar for joining us from Chennai. My thanks to Professor Rajamohan and Mr. Mansingh for coming to studio. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.